Welcome to Panel 2's session, Panel 1's session, number 2, on technology and business hurdles in achieving agile manufacturing. So Panel 1, all of the presentations are about agile manufacturing. And today, this afternoon, we're going to talk about technology and business hurdles. My name is Steve Schultz. I'm one of the co-chairs of this panel, along with John Dyke from the Clean Energy Smart Manufacturing Innovation Institute. And we have the fortune of having some really wonderful speakers on our lineup of sessions. And in this session, we've got 3 that are going to talk to us about some things that are going to be very interesting. We thought agility and COVID and smart manufacturing all fit really well together. And I think we've got some sessions that are working well for us. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items. I'd like to thank the sponsors, first of all, for making this event possible, especially DTE Energy. They're the host sponsor. You can click on the sponsor link on the left-hand column of your page and visit their site to learn more about their work. We have an exciting lineup of speakers. All presentations will be given for 20 minutes, and then the last 15 minutes of the session will be for questions and answers. The questions will be from the chat, so as you have questions while the speakers are speaking, please enter your questions and we will revisit them and discuss them during the question and answer period. If we don't have time for answering some of the questions, ACEEE will collect the questions, forward them to the authors, and the authors will get back to you with their answers. If you'd like to connect with other attendees, please take advantage of the attendee link. Please try not to use the chat stream, the chat box for communication among the attendees during the presentation, as we will be trying to keep that for accumulating questions and answers. I guess conversation that might be related to the presentations is fine, but the how are you today kind of thing, maybe we can do through the other attendee link thing. You'll find additional resources here as well, the conference proceedings, the attendee list, and an evaluation survey. By the way, anybody who fills out the evaluation survey and provides their name and a testimonial will receive a discount to the 2023 Industrial Summer Study. In the program participants link, you'll find information about all the presenters, including their bios and copies of their presentations. And lastly, I want to encourage you to join the end of the day debrief that will follow this to learn about other discussions that you may have missed and take part in other networking opportunities. Now let's get started with our speakers. Our first speaker is Clifton Yin. Clifton is a senior energy and sustainability analyst at the consulting firm ICF, where he primarily supports the U.S. Department of Energy's Advanced Manufacturing Office and Better Buildings, Better Plants program. Clifton graduated from Claremont McKenna College with a bachelor's degree in government and history and received a Master of Public Policy degree with a focus on environmental and regulatory policy from Georgetown University. Clifton will talk about how manufacturers are finding new energy savings by engaging on-site teams through crowdsourcing and gamification, which sounds very interesting to me. So with that, I'd like to ask Clifton to begin.
Thanks very much, Steve. That was great. Yeah, so my name is Clifton. I'm very happy to be here. As Steve mentioned, I'm with ICF. I wrote this paper in conjunction with my colleagues Mitch Brown and Jesse Gilbert at ICF, and we're excited to present today. So as Steve said, we're talking about how manufacturers are finding new energy savings by engaging on-site teams through crowdsourcing and gamification. So let's quickly go over our agenda and see what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to provide some context into employee engagement and industrial EE. I'm going to look at Kotter's model for organizational change, and we apply it to several Better Plants case studies. So Better Plants is a U.S. Department of Energy program that Mitch, Jesse, and myself support through ICF. And so it was, a helpful resource for interesting examples and case studies for IEE engagement. So we'll look at four case studies from ArcelorMittal, Celanese, Legrand, and Saint-Gobain. And then I'll touch on some further avenues of research and other topics worth exploring. So, why this topic? So, through our work with the DOE's Better Plants program, we've interacted with a lot of manufacturers that have successfully used employee engagement campaigns to increase the impact of their energy management programs. And through this, we've also seen how games and competitions are increasingly used to accelerate energy savings and participation in said EE programs. And as my colleagues and I started to do some research on how gamification is being used in industrial efficiency programs, we kind of realized that a lot of the research focuses on residential and commercial programs. And we just felt like a lot more could be done to show how manufacturers in particular are using gamification to meet energy goals and come up with some of the best practices based on organizational change models. So, for context, for all of human history, from the ancient Olympics to now to modern soccer leagues and poker competitions, games are a really important part of how human beings interact. And there's science and fact behind it. So recreational games have been proven to promote teamwork, problem solving, and decision making. And games with a social component, when you're interacting with people, have been proven to foster creativity. And organizations have increasingly noticed these beneficial outcomes and have kind of begun to leverage game design to better engage with their customers and with their employees and promote organizational change. And of course, this also applies to the industrial sector. So we have seen an increasing impact on energy management when it comes to industrial companies, which is why we're talking about this paper today. So let's define some of the definitions here. So crowdsourcing. So, quote, it's the process by which an activity is reassigned from a single agent to a larger, more diverse group or crowd, end quote. So I think you're pretty familiar with this. Crowdsourcing is very common. People use it to design T-shirts, to gather facts. Like if you go to like Quora.com, if you used to be able to ask questions, or Yahoo Answers, ask people on the internet for answers to your questions. So gamification, quote, is the process of using game design and game elements in non-game settings. Game elements often include competition, leaderboards, prizes, and rules, end quote. So gamification has traditionally been used to drive engagement with customers and employees, promote learning and change behaviors, and it has all those benefits that we mentioned before. So let's get even more into brass tacks here. So how do these approaches to employee engagement relate to industrial energy management in particular? So we looked at kind of three main ways to do this. Crowdsourcing, which we previously defined, competitions in which you modify behavior in a way that contributes to energy efficiency, but more specifically, you actually engage employees in the process. And to incentivize participation, you recognize and reward participants. And then finally, there's serious games, which is kind of an emerging area that we just touched on in our paper. Serious games are kind of combining learning strategies and game elements to teach specific skills, knowledge, and attitudes. So it's pretty much exactly what it says it is. So rather than just a standard lesson, you actually put the lesson in a game format. So I think many of you will probably be pretty familiar with some of the examples from the public and private sectors. So there's the X Prize from Elon Musk, which is a competition with a $100 million prize focused on carbon removal. DOE has a longstanding solar decathlon, which inspires university students from around the world actually to pursue clean energy careers by dabbling in advanced efficient facilities and solar panels. DOE recently announced an L Prize, which is a cash prize related to advancing lighting innovation in the commercial sector. And NASA has a spacesuit detection challenge, which kind of seeks novel solutions to labeling and IDing spacesuit motions. So, this is a very common and emerging tactic. So we looked at Better Plans examples through the lens of John Kotter's model for organizational change. This is a pretty popular framework. If you went to business school, you're probably familiar with it. Basically, it's a way to drive organizational change by following 8 steps. So 1, establish a sense of urgency. 2, create a guiding coalition. 3, develop a vision and strategy. 4, communicate the change vision. 5, empower employees for broad-based action. 6, generate short-term wins. 7, consolidate gains and produce more change. And then finally 8, anchor new approaches in the culture. So we apply this model to Better Plans case studies to kind of identify best practices and replicable strategies for driving EE through games and crowdsourcing. So what is Better Plants? Better Plants is a DOE program. It's a partnership program in which industrial companies voluntarily partner with DOE and pledge to improve energy intensity. Typically, it's 25% reduction over 10 years. And in return for this purely voluntary pledge, public pledge, Better Plants, DOE and Better Plants provide technical resources, tools, and recognition when partners reach certain milestones. And one of these recognition avenues is the Better Project and Better Practice Award series. And so every year, Better Plans will recognize partner companies that either implement a very innovative capital project, like a physical improvement, or an innovative cultural or organizational change, so like a qualitative improvement. And we noticed through our support for Better Plans that so a lot of awards are increasingly focused on employee engagement activities, and in particular on crowdsourcing and gamification. So we'll look at 4 examples quickly. The first one is ArcelorMittal. The company is actually now Cleveland Cliffs, but ArcelorMittal created a Power of One contest in which they encouraged individual employees to submit new low and no cost energy savings ideas for their facilities. So this is an example of crowdsourcing and competition. Submissions were rated on a 0 to 4 scale based on cost effectiveness, replicability, and creativity. So an example would just be one facility used a special infrared camera to detect natural gas leaks. So pretty straightforward. And winning employees received prizes: Amazon Echo Dots and Waterhawk Smart Shower Heads, and recognition through internal and external avenues. And they had really good results. In 3 years of this Power of One contest, the company implemented 15 projects that were submitted from employees, and the total savings were over $1 million. So we applied Cotter's 8-step model to ArcelorMittal to what they did to the Power of One contest to see if it lined up. And lo and behold, it did. Not only for this example, but for our other 3 examples. We're not going to go through every single step because we don't have time. But of course, I encourage you to read the full paper. Also, all of these case studies from our partners are on the Better Plans website online, so you can read in more detail about what ArcelorMittal did. But I kind of want to point out that I'll just pull out one example. So I think in terms of creating the guiding coalition, ArcelorMittal really did a particularly impressive thing. They brought together an energy team, but it was diverse. They had people from multiple divisions, so a management level, but also local facility champions. And it was they also had management buy-in, so it was clear that they had high level support for the initiative. So it was, I think it was in this case, it was a very important driver in the effective program. Let's look at example number 2 from Celanese Corporation. So Celanese did the Energy Sparks training tools. This is a crowdsourcing example. So they basically created kind of one-page did you know style fact sheets and tools about energy topics related to a manufacturing plant. And of course, these ideas were submitted from employees. And topics were selected by a global Energy Council team, and they ultimately selected and published tools on steam traps, compressed air, insulation, valve throttling on pumping systems, and more. And the Energy Sparks themselves are, they're shared widely at toolbox shift meetings, and also displayed on bulletin boards throughout partner facilities. And 15 Energy Sparks were ultimately developed, but they're planning on creating more. And not only that, but translating them into multiple languages such that they can disseminate them more widely internationally. And so here we applied Cotter's 8-step model. Let's look at one example. So consolidating gains and producing more change. So the Energy Sparks were not just some theoretical exercise, or it actually resulted in real world results. So an employee was kind of inspired by the Energy Spark on steam traps, and they performed their own impromptu steam trap inspection. They found a broken steam trap, and they repaired it themselves. And normally this would have been a lot of time and money. They would have had to hire an outside expert. They would have had to schedule a repair team. They would have to wait for the person to come in and repair it. It would have cost money to pay them. But this, the Energy Spark inspired actual change at the facility. Let's look at our third of 4 examples. This one's from Legrand, North America. They did energy marathon competition. So they launched this energy marathon over 26.2 days, that being the length of a marathon, and dedicated to facility employees competing to ID and implement energy savings. And so 26 sites from across the U.S. participated. Prizes were awarded to employees who developed creative energy savings ideas like carpooling to work, packing zero waste lunches, creating water awareness signage. So pretty accessible things. But all these activities added up. So over the course of 3 different energy marathons, Legrand has saved over 1.8 million kilowatt hours and $185,000 in energy costs. So here we apply Kotter's model. And so let's look at how they anchored new approaches in the culture. So not only did they do all this incredible creative program, they actually compiled an energy marathon toolkit, which is a full, I think it's like 20-page guide to how they did it. And it's publicly available on their website, so anyone can access it and try to replicate it. But not only that, the energy marathon, I mentioned they have had 3 over the last several years, with plans to do more. But every 3 has evolved, expanded, grown over time. The first marathon only engaged a few facilities, but the last one engaged several more. And so the energy marathon has really become part of Legrand's culture. So Saint-Gobain, let's look at their compressed competition. So this was a compressed air use reduction competition with teams of up to 5 employees from 19 company facilities across the U.S. And teams competing in compressed it were just awarded points for completing several actions and achievements related to compressed air use reduction. They distributed a monthly newsletter with updates and like mini contests to make it more fun. For example, they did prizes for superlatives like most innovative employee engagement and best team names. Since I'm a lover of puns, I have to point out some of the noteworthy names from Compress-It. So the Saint-Gobain Oxford, North Carolina facility, their team was called WikiLeaks, which is pretty good. The Ennis, Texas facility was Full of Hot Air. And the Avery facility, I believe that's in North Carolina as well. But the Avery facility was called the Avery Avengers. So some pretty creative team names there. And over 3 months, Saint-Gobain was able to save a total of 26 gigawatt and $2.5 million in electricity costs simply by fixing compressed air leaks. So applying, again, Kotter's 8-step model, let's look at one in particular, so generating short-term wins. So as I mentioned, it was clearly they had very impressive results. The sites saved a bunch of electricity and dollars, but overall, this is approximately 5% of the total energy spent of all the sites participating in 2018. And again, this is over a much shorter time frame. So the savings really were quite impressive for such a short-term program. And here's a testimonial from the Legrand HR manager. So they said, quote, "I really appreciated the energy marathon event because it made me think differently, and I've already altered some of my behaviors because of it," end quote. And this, I think, really encapsulates what we're talking about when we're in terms of gamification and crowdsourcing. This is what we want to try to do, not only save energy, but alter behavior and culture as part of it. So we really just touched on these examples in our paper, but clearly there's a lot of additional avenues for research and further exploration. So, we provide a starting point for applying Kotter's 8 steps to improving or refining an industrial organization's employee engagement efforts. But I think we can take an even deeper dive and look at even more examples besides just the 4. We also touched on the application of serious games as an emerging approach to gamification and how it can be used for energy-related trainings. But there are also real-world examples of this. So we know that 3M is using serious games to help energy managers leverage non-energy benefits, multiple benefits of their projects, and they're also exploring other applications like upskilling staff to impact energy savings in their jobs. More broadly, we're also aware that there are an increasing use of digital tools like wireless sensors and apps applications to increase social engagement and track participation. And so this is an interesting development that could deserve some further attention. And there are a couple other examples addressing the challenges of short-term persistence of energy savings associated with programs that rely on behavioral changes and how to overcome this through recurring activities and continuous reinforcement. That's a possible avenue for gamification and crowdsourcing. And then lastly, utility SEM, utility strategic energy management. They could be another resource for best practices and additional case studies on new ways that gamified efforts are increasing energy savings for industrial organizations. So with that, I want to thank you for this opportunity, both on myself, but also on behalf of my colleagues, Mitch Brown and Jesse. And we also want to thank several folks at Better Plants and DOE and Oak Ridge National Lab who are involved in Better Plants. So Eli Levine, Bruce Lung, and Tom Wenning for supporting us in this paper and helping us find some of these examples. So with that, thank you very much. It was my pleasure to present.
Thank you, Clifton. That's much appreciated. I think it's very interesting. A lot of times it's an energy person's job, and somebody usually in the utilities department who's responsible or is felt to be responsible for managing energy in an organization. But actually, I think everybody needs to be involved, and this is a good way to get them involved. Thank you. Our next speaker is Allison Ross. Allison is a certified energy manager, and she's an engineering manager with Vermont Energy Investment Corporation in Winooski, Vermont. She works with military and multifamily customers on energy resilience and efficiency, as well as leads research and project teams. Her technical focus is on building thermal shells, and her research interest is energy resilience and microgrids, particularly within a military context. An Army veteran, she holds a BS in environmental science from the United States Military Academy at West Point and an MS in environmental science from the University of Illinois. And Allison will talk to us about monetizing energy resilience. Allison, when you're ready.
Great, thank you, Steve. So I am Allison Ross. I'm an engineering manager in Vermont with BEIC. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how to monetize an investment in energy resilience. It's a very elusive concept. There's a lot of thoughts out there on how you might calculate the payback on this kind of investment, but it's very complicated. There's not really an industry standard. So I have come up with what I recommend to be the formulation for calculating what your investment payback might look like if you invest in something like a microgrid or even simply a generator. So the first thing we want to do is understand the difference between energy hardening and energy resilience. So the Department of Energy defines hardening as physically changing your infrastructure so that it's less susceptible to damage. So it's going to withstand the damage and prevent the damage and continue normal operations through that adverse event. Up here in the New England area, folks put snow tires on our cars in the wintertime. So to compare that to something like snow tires, we put snow tires on our cars to harden our cars against slippery roads in the wintertime. Energy resilience is going to refer to the ability to quickly recover from damage. So when you're talking about energy resilience, damage has happened, and your resilience plan is going to allow you to quickly recover from that, as well as maintain your critical operations until you're able to come back online. So you're not able to maintain your full operations. You're just going to support the things that are critical until you're able to get everything back up and running again. So going back to the snow tire analogy, you might have AAA as well as put snow tires on your car because, sometimes those snow tires just aren't going to be enough to hold you on the road. You're going to slide into the ditch, call AAA to pull you out. It only makes economic sense to harden your system up to a certain point. Up in the New England area, we aren't going to harden our systems against a Category 5 hurricane. That doesn't make economic sense for the amount of risk that carries. That is a different story if you're somewhere in, say, Florida. But you're also not going to, buy snow tires if you're in Florida as you would if you're in New England. So you've got to look at the economics of how far it makes sense to harden your system. And then after that, you're going to mitigate against those risks that are catastrophic, but also low likelihood. So there's a lot of planning processes out there for assessing your energy resilience. I've distilled a bunch of them down into a 5-step process. Department of Energy has some, Department of Defense has some. There's a lot of different federal organizations that have gone through this exercise before and have come up with a planning process. And this one is kind of a combination of all of them. I've looked at all of them that are out there that folks have gone through before, and tried to make something that was easy to follow for a business owner or somebody who doesn't do this every day. It's really a thought exercise, so you really need to sit down with your stakeholders in your company and go through this exercise. So it's really important to go through this exercise because your answers to each of these steps is going to inform what your energy resilience infrastructure looks like and what it can do, what kind of budget you're going to need. So going through this exercise is going to save you a lot of time in the long run if you sit down with your stakeholders and figure out what your needs are, what your capabilities are, and what you're able to manage on your own and what maybe you're not able to manage on your own and might have to contract out with somebody else. So evaluating costs, it's a tall order, and this is a thought exercise, but it's going to pay itself back in the time you'll save in the long run. Not everybody needs to go through the exercise of energy resilience. So this is step one in that planning process, is figure out if you need to have energy resilience in the first place. So there's 3 categories of risks that are going to necessitate energy resilience in your facility. If you were to lose energy, power, is there a risk of loss of life or critical loss of property? So maybe you don't care if one of your light bollards gets taken out, but you might care if one of your buildings gets taken out. The other thing is significant financial losses. So if there's a risk that your company is at risk of going under because of the financial loss, that's something that you're going to want to consider in your resilience plan. And that's the last thing is if you're providing a critical service or product for the community or society. So the big example here is going to be emergency services, police, fire, ambulance, medical clinics, people like that who are providing a service that really can't do without when it comes to responding to events. Some reasons that you might not need to think of resilience, if your loss doesn't fall into any of this. So, for example, eBay has some data centers that they don't need to have a resilience plan for at that site because they can simply move those operations to another data center in another region of the country. So, for a smaller business owner, if you're a bank owner, can you move your operations to a different branch in a different area and just shut your branch down? In that case, you don't need to go through the expense, or the time or the investment of putting infrastructure in your actual facility. So one of the really low-cost ways that you can think about it is how can you shift your operations if that's possible. The pandemic has really shown that places like grocery stores provide critical products. Pharmacies could potentially be another type of operation that really needs to think about their energy resilience. So broad overview here, these are the mathematical formulas, and I just put them up here to show that there are mathematical formulas you can go through here, but I'm going to go through each of these in a little bit more in-depth way to talk about what some of these variables are and what goes into calculating what your potential net present value of your investment is. The first thing to do, the most resilient energy is energy that you do not need in the first place. So if you don't need it, it can't be disrupted. So energy efficiency and demand reduction are the very first things to start looking at. They limit your critical load that you need to serve in the first place. So existing infrastructure could potentially serve that load to a greater capacity. It could serve it for a longer time period, or if it's not sufficient to serve what you have defined as your critical load, it could potentially help bring that critical load down to what your existing infrastructure could potentially serve. It also will limit your capital costs for resilience infrastructure. It could mean smaller equipment. It could mean simpler equipment. If it's simpler, it's easier for your staff to operate. It has lower maintenance cost. You potentially don't need to train your staff on new, more complicated equipment. It's going to be much easier to operate. So how do you get the load as low as possible is the first order of business before you even planning your infrastructure to serve your critical loads. So it's a very important part of calculating the capital costs under the formulas that I've created here. And within the formulation, the energy efficiency cost formula, which I've reproduced here. So here we're just comparing the capital costs under different scenarios. So the energy efficiency is a resilience measure, and it's a very important one because it cascades and it impacts all of the rest of your potential resilience measures. So calculating capital costs, the way I've set it up here is we're comparing the capital costs for different infrastructure setups. So, if you are looking at your critical loads as they stand now, versus what your critical loads could be if you implement certain packages of energy efficiency upgrades first. So you're also going to consider things like, an energy audit in those costs, the costs of labor, the costs of products, the costs of any retrofits you need to implement some of these. You may even want to try to eliminate as many fossil fuels as possible and electrify as much as possible, because maybe you want to do something like solar and battery, or maybe another thing that people forget about when they're thinking about some of the ways that they could potentially serve critical loads and what constitutes critical loads is thinking about how you get your energy delivered and what are the risks that delivery mechanism could be disrupted. So we usually think about power outages for electricity, but if you get fuel oil, is there a risk that fuel truck can't get to you if certain events happen? Propane, if you're on a natural gas service, what are the chances that natural gas could be disrupted? And those are all things that need to be thought about on an individual basis. So under this formulation, we're looking at the impacts to the utility bill. So what does your utility bill look like now? What does it look like after you implement efficiency measures? Do you have a demand charge reduction, energy charge reduction? Can you get into a different billing structure, rate structure with your utility? You want to look at any rebates and incentives that you can get. And then the cost for the efficiency measures themselves. And the way this formula is set up is it compares each of them, each of your packages of potential energy efficiency upgrades, and gets to the capital cost for the energy resilience infrastructure that is going to be able to be implemented because of those energy efficiency upgrades. So there's a lot of people think, for resilience asset components, people go straight to microgrids, battery, solar. It doesn't necessarily need to be battery and solar, and really, it's not necessarily even renewables. Your diesel generator can provide your energy resilience. It's not just, and it's also not just a solar panel. If you just have solar, that does not constitute energy resilience. Energy resilience means that you're able to self-sustain your critical operations for whatever time duration you've defined for yourself. And you've got to go through that thought exercise of exactly how long of an outage do I need to plan for. A lot of people think on the order of hours. It's good to look at past history in your region to figure out, what kind of events have happened and how long are typical outages, how long has been the longest outage, and think about it in those terms. You also want to think about other fuels. potentially a wood pellet system with a hopper that's big enough to store enough pellets to serve your loads for the duration of the time that you want to be self-sufficient. It could be things like phase change materials, which are new and up and coming things that you can implement in your buildings that can help float your building and take some of the load off your HVAC when you're not on any type of service. Next thing to think about is how long is a lifetime? That's an easy thing when you're talking about a generator. It's a generator, generators have typical lifetime. But what if you have more complex infrastructure? What if you have that solar panel mixed with a battery, mixed with the wires and the switches and the software system to run it all? How do you decide what the lifespan of the whole system is going to be? So my recommendation would be to take the most expensive components, maybe the most expensive 2 or 3 components, and call those the lifetime of the equipment. And things that have a much shorter lifetime are going to be part of your maintenance upgrades within that. And that needs to be something that you've got to think about from a business perspective as well. Maybe the cost of the longest lifetime piece of equipment is something that would be economically challenging for you to replace, and you need to calculate it on a different lifetime because of the economic implications for you if you were to consider the whole package of infrastructure with that long of a timeline. Maybe the upgrade costs of the 5th most expensive component is just too much for your business to handle, and you've got to make that lifetime the one that you're going to think about your infrastructure within. That's going to play into here within the formulas that are developed here, because it does use lifetime of the system to calculate your net present value. So that's going to be something that comes into play and gets to be really important for how long you're thinking about when you're trying to calculate your payback. So the cost of resilience, the way it's developed here, it falls into 3 different broad categories. The first one is going to be capital costs. So it can be difficult to target. Obviously, the best thing to do is to get a quote. And that is really easier said than done unless you already have your contractors in place or you already have people that are experienced in the way to specify some of these things and what the costs could be. Another way to do it is to get industry data, costing data from others who have done something similar as a starting place ballpark. You're also going to think about your engineering and design fees for designing the infrastructure itself, and anything that needs to be retrofitted within your facility to allow your energy resilience assets to be implemented. And retrofits can potentially come up as a surprise. And things that come in here is are you eliminating fossil fuels? Are you switching to a different fossil fuel? So those kind of retrofits need to be considered. Operating costs are another big one. So thinking about your personnel, do you already have staff that can operate this equipment? Do you need to send them out to training? Do you need to hire people that have specific skill sets that can manage this energy infrastructure? And this comes back into the energy efficiency piece, where the simpler it is, the easier this piece is going to be. Another option could be a third-party contract to have a third party operate your system. So the costs of that need to be considered. Cybersecurity is another one. I know we've seen in the news quite a bit lately about cyber attacks on pipelines. This definitely needs to be considered in the process. Don't make it an afterthought. I think energy security, cybersecurity is going to be more and more important, as time goes on. So get that planned in at the beginning. Any consumables used for your system to function. So, as you would with any other system and operating it, planning the costs for those in there. The next is maintenance costs. So thinking about personnel again, can the same personnel maintain it as well as operate it? What kind of skill sets are needed for that? Do you need to invest in training for people? Do you need to hire people with specific skill sets? Can also do third-party contracting. You're going to calculate here your component lifespan replacement. So here comes back that planning for the lifespan of your equipment, and everything that falls under that is going to be an equipment lifespan replacement. Routine tuning and calibration, just like any piece of equipment you have. And then again, any consumables you need in the course of maintenance. So the benefits of resilience, and this is really where systems like microgrids start to become more attractive than things like generators, because they have the potential to work for you even when there's not a incident that you're responding to. So the benefits means the value that the investment can provide beyond meeting the resilience goals. So areas of benefit, beyond supporting your critical loads. So at the bare minimum, the system needs to support your critical loads, or it's not an energy resilience asset, which is fine. But if your end goal is to protect your business in the event of an outage, first and foremost, it needs to support your critical loads. It could be possible to design your system so that you can take advantage of benefits that could potentially only be available at certain sizes. So, maybe a certain storage size or minimum grid service capacity could impact your energy bill, and investing in something slightly larger could have, offer broader utility benefits that might be worth investing in. Really need to get all of the stakeholders involved here. Get the utility engaged very early on, because having their input as you're designing it is going to help with making sure that your system can do what you expect it to do. And ISOs and RTOs, a lot of them have services and programs that you can participate in as well. So you want to get them involved. Your utility bill, so calculating here the benefits of resilience, looking at your utility bill, we're going to look at the savings that you can see in your demand. So you can use some of these assets for peak shaving. You can use some of these assets to optimize time of use rates, frequency regulation programs. What is the bill benefit that you can see from something like an ISO? Energy use decrease that you see with energy efficiency to limit your requirements from a long-term perspective. Then the value of the lost load, and I'm going to get into value of lost load here on the next slide, because it does get a little bit abstract. But what we're looking at here is things like product losses, sales losses, employee labor that's diverted to other tasks other than what they're being paid to do. And then the last one is business budget savings. So things that are not necessarily related to an outage, but might be impacted by resilience assets. And a prime example of that is insurance premiums. So if you're insured for losses, for, say, storms, product losses that could be due to any of these outages, a lot of times there could be opportunity to reduce your insurance costs because you are putting in place measures to mitigate some of those losses and prevent them. So the value of the lost load is even more of a thought exercise. This is income and profits that would have been realized during normal operations, or costs that are incurred because of the outage. Percent availability in relation to lost load can be used for yearly estimates. So if you're a new business, and I'm going to get into percent availability here shortly, but there's a way to estimate. If you're a brand new business, you don't have any historic data, but historic data is a great way to go and find some of these values and what some of this might look like. So you're looking at labor hours that might be diverted. So that could be something like in a medical facility, a nurse that has to go restart equipment rather than take care of patients, or somebody that works on your assembly line who now has to go fix equipment that is down because the power was suddenly out, rather than working on that product. Maintenance staff or production staff that have to be diverted to other tasks. Fixing problems caused by an outage instead of producing the product. Anything along those lines are those hours and the salary that you're paying these employees all count as lost value. Materials that are lost. So for example, a bakery or food service could lose food. A laboratory might lose experiment losses. Production lines could experience destroyed product if a line stops before the product is finished certain steps. Lost sales, so inability to complete transactions, inability to accept online orders, inability to run credit cards, all of the sales that you don't get because you're not able to do that is all part of your lost load. The big elephant in the room is, how do you value a life? So if you're an emergency responder and you're not able to respond to the call, how do you put a value on that life that may be lost? And my recommendation here is that that is not part of the value of lost load. That is part of your energy resilience. And if you're not able to support that critical load, then you don't have energy resilience. Percent availability, here's where you can use this metric if you don't have historic data. And all it really is saying is, what is your historic time where you might be out. So you might be out for, and the variable H here is hours that you're on. So out of all the hours in the year, maybe you're out for a full day. So you would calculate the remainder hours of the year that you're on, and here's your percent availability. It's a percentage you can apply to other industry metrics to try to get a sense of what your availability might be for your operation, particularly if you are a new business. All right, thank you very much. I will send it back over to Steve, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Allison. I much appreciated that. That's a very in-depth way and I think detailed way of looking at resilience and being able to present that. I think that's something a lot of people have tried to do, but I think fall short, not having had the experience that you've got with it. Our next speakers are from the BPA, and we have two, but I have the bio of only one. Eric Mullendor. Eric has 13 years of experience advancing energy efficiency in the commercial and industrial applications, whether as an energy efficiency program implementer, controls contractor, or government employee. He has enjoyed the challenge of learning from the experts and figuring out how to turn identified best practices into industry standard practice. Eric currently serves as lead for Bonneville Power Administration's energy efficiency efforts in the commercial and industrial sectors. And the title of the presentation will be Viral Content, Lessons Learned from COVID-19 for the Future. And when we begin, Eric, could you also introduce your co-presenter? Thank you.
I sure will. Can you hear me all right? All right. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Allison. I always appreciate to seeing energy efficiency in the front of the line. Yeah, today my colleague Bob Brennan and I will be presenting on some lessons learned that our program learned while we responded to COVID. So the words disruptor or disruption have really become commonplace in any discussion of today's economy. But it would be hard to find a disruption in modern American history as sudden and far-reaching as COVID-19 has been over the last 16 months. Of course, energy efficiency was impacted just like other parts of the American economy. My name is Eric Mullendor with Bonneville Power Administration and Bob Brennan with Cascade Energy. Today, we're going to be sharing some of the adjustments that our utility-funded energy efficiency program made starting in March 2020 in response to COVID-19. We'll cover some of those adjustments that went well, some of them that did not go well at all. But stepping back for a moment, COVID's over, right? What's the big deal? Why is this topic interesting? And I and Bob think they're interesting, as well as the other team members on ESI, because they're likely to impact the way that BPA serves the industrial market moving forward. I think we've learned some things that are going to allow us to more efficiently and equitably reach our goals in the industrial sector. So next slide, please. Just a little bit about Bonneville Power Administration. For those of you who are not familiar, we are a nonprofit federal power marketing administration based in the Pacific Northwest. We market wholesale electrical power from 31 federal hydroelectric projects in the Columbia River Basin to over 130 public utility customers. And our overall service territory as a wholesale provider covers over 300,000 square miles, so pretty spread out service territory. As part of our statutory mandate and our overall mission to deliver the best value to our customers and regional stakeholders, BPA promotes energy efficiency as the lowest cost resource for meeting load growth in the region. Next slide, please. The ESI, or Energy Smart Industrial, or ESI program, is a BPA-funded energy efficiency program that recently celebrated 10 years of pursuing energy efficiency in the industrial sector across BPA service territory. Cascade Energy has been a collaborative partner with BPA in both designing and implementing ESI from the start. So I'm just going to cover a few high-level items about the overall program design before we dive into some of the adjustments that we made in response to COVID. So the comprehensive program design has 5 main components with custom projects listed on the left part of the screen, representing the bulk of the program savings at about 70% each year. Some of our energy management offerings, such as strategic energy management and energy project managers, bring in another 15%. And then our more trade ally driven components, small industrial and industrial lighting, bring in the remaining 15%. The Energy Smart Industrial Partners, or ESIPs, which you'll see here in the center of the graphic, are key staff as trusted technical advisors for both our utility partners as well as the industries we serve. Bob manages the ESIP team, which is why he's here to share all the real insights from the program. And then they also have pools. The ESIPs have pools of technical service providers and lighting specialists available to support them for specific project needs. And then maybe in a slight twist to the typical utility funded energy efficiency program, because BPA is a wholesaler, we offer the program in partnership with our utility customers. So they work closely with them to serve a large variety of industrial end users. So everything from large aerospace, pulp and paper, food production, high-tech manufacturing, all the way down to a small linen service in Jackson, Wyoming. So there's really a widespread in both industries and capacities in the end users that we serve. Okay, so next slide, and on to kind of the meat of the presentation today. The Energy Smart Industrial Partners, the ESIPs, you might really think of as account managers or outreach engineers in the way that they serve the market, have historically spent a significant amount of time in the field auditing industrial sites for new upgrade opportunities, meeting with facility staff and management to move projects forward, delivering trainings, and deploying and retrieving data loggers for measurement and verification. In March 2020, we implemented a safety protocol in response to COVID that really saw a dramatic drop in our field activity and a big jump in our use of remote meetings to kind of pick up the slack and keep projects moving. Luckily, the ESI team itself was already pretty well versed in the use of Microsoft Teams as a platform, because so many of our ESIPs are remotely based. So we kind of had a little bit of a head start, but there were a number of other changes that we needed to make to meet the market where it was during this disruption. Bob, would you like to?
Yep. Yeah. So as Eric mentioned, Microsoft Teams had already been adopted. I think there were a couple of utilities a little bit farther behind. They caught up pretty quickly, and as Zoom and Teams became more popular, the end users also became very familiar. And most of them are out in industrial sites. They're not, I guess, what you'd call desk jockeys, and they picked it up relatively quickly. We had some challenges. I think I would say throughout the pandemic, new project development and project closeouts, which are both extremely key for our program, were much tougher to accomplish without the ability to see plants and equipment. Conversely, we had some great successes. It turned out sharing screens online ended up with better plant information, data, trends, and Excel analysis being able to be shared. And we found that regular meetings that had been done in person continued. They maintained momentum, and also travel time was eliminated. So you get more done in a day often. As the chart shows, the remote meetings largely did replace drop-in in-person meetings. And what we did find is the in-person meetings started back up earlier in rural areas such as Idaho and Montana, with the more populous regions such as Seattle, Portland, Tacoma, those areas last to basically get back to in-person meetings, due to requirements at the sites and the local municipalities. So due to less travel and user comfort level, some regular meetings will likely remain virtual in the future. And as of Q3, as you can see, we're basically back up to traditional in-person visits. So the next, we'll go on. The next illustrates some of the other program shifts that we had. As Eric mentioned, deploying data loggers is a big component of the ESIP or account manager's role, and often they've got to go out and work with the plant, figure out what it's going to take to do some baseline or post-project data logging. Sometimes that can be very simple, but other times it may require up to 10 data loggers, in which does take a fair amount of time to program and deploy. So during the pandemic, we basically refined our remote deployment data logger strategy, testing loggers before sending them out, approving instructions for end users to install them, and then giving them prepaid return labels to make it very easy for them to return them on time. For straightforward, simple projects, the strategy works well and will likely be continued, and utilized after the pandemic, just due to the reduced travel time for the account managers and better logger inventory management. But large, complicated data logging projects, they'll continue to be done in person. And the other thing that, excuse me. So online training was another avenue that was emphasized during COVID, to fill in the gap of the in-person training and workplace workshops that have been traditionally given. The basic training that we decided to focus on initially was compressed air, since it's often a very good energy savings opportunity. I think we ended up coming up with 6 popular compressed air project types. It's kind of a mix of low cost, no cost opportunities, as well as 2 of the most common capital upgrades that we see on single compressor systems. And I think that basically was like dryer upgrades and new VSD compressors. But besides customer service, the other objectives, were to provide awareness of the utility incentive programs and generate leads for new projects. And doing it online, we're able to invite large groups of potential users, industrial users, and that resulted, frankly, in meeting both those 2 goals. We were able to connect with some new users. I think one of this webinars, after it, we had 2 users that had not participated in any energy efficiency previously call the utility and request a site visit to come scope out their compressed air systems. That was clear success. And we've already been able to utilize that training with a different utility, and I'm sure we'll continue to refine it and probably develop other training sessions. Lastly, another strategy that had some modest success was to revisit projects that had been developed and analyzed and put on hold in the past. And some of these had to be suddenly looked like much better projects, either just due to different economic scenarios or a change in the end user's business. But it was nice to have basically some shovel-ready projects that they could implement and receive incentives on. So, basically, as this chart shows, overall, we felt the big picture was very successful. I mean, the custom project savings numbers, in kilowatt hours per year here, are really the ultimate measure of a program's success. And as you can see, the decrease was very minimal. If you compare pre-COVID on the left half of this chart, basically, versus during COVID, which is the right half, um, you know, and that was due to a lot of reasons. One of those was the site staff were a huge help in filling the gap when the account manager typically couldn't visit in person. They helped gather data, they took photos, sent invoices, and all kinds of other tasks that the account managers would typically do. But despite all that help from the staff, they still have their job to do. And one of the things, like I said earlier, discovering new projects was very difficult to do without being on site. And the other thing we found is just information gathering that typically the account managers could do themselves was slowed down because it was kind of an additional task that the site staff had to take on. But the one thing that was gratifying, I think, that while there were some projects that were delayed due to the pandemic and associated logistics and part shortages, we found few projects were canceled right out. So it just kind of had to have a little more patience, but the projects did happen eventually. So last couple slides talked about capital project savings, and I think the next few here we're going to talk a little bit about strategic energy management, or SEM, savings procedures. And traditionally, nearly all our previous trainings, workshops, visits, etc., were in person. So ESI's biggest concern when the pandemic hit is, what are we going to do now? And we basically planned a cohort to start up in the next month or two, and we seriously considered scrapping it. And I think in the end decided, hey, let's give it a shot doing it remotely. And basically after deciding to go pivot to remote delivery for all our workshops, the primary goal really became participant engagement. And with some trial and error, we kind of learned some of the following things. And one of them, a typical 4 to 5 hour in-person workshop, just wasn't going to work. So they were broken up into 2 to 3 shorter sessions with regular breaks every hour. The pace was purposely varied, kind of mixed between training content with group activities. We found an event coordinator was invaluable in managing the chat feature, setting up breakout rooms, troubleshooting users' tech issues, and keeping track of time. Another thing that worked well was providing a brief overview of the technical platform at the beginning of the meeting and the key features. And that basically gave the end users or the participants a lot more confidence in participating and being part of the webinar. Unique tools such as Mural and quizzes such as Kahoot and Mentimeter, added a fun factor and, allowed everyone to contribute. And, we also called on individuals to participate occasionally, kind of, which kept them, focused. And, as, basically in summary, as the chart shows, most of the cohort attendance improved, and the 2 new cohorts, basically here and here, had excellent participation right off the bat. So that was nice to see. Another issue, with cohorts was, or another main advantage of pivoting to remote workshops and training was both practical and financial. We were able to get a much broader range of industrial users participating together, without the travel. And we're also able to bring in technical experts and SEM coaches that, many times could not have made the trip, so to speak, in the past. So this chart kind of shows examples of 2 wastewater energy coaching cohorts. The one in the upper left was set up a few years ago, and to do the training, make it worthwhile, we had to have a very tight geographical cluster. Whereas this second cohort in the green circles was same kind of cohort, was set up in 2020 with a broad geographical range. And we are doing several of these kind of industry-specific cohorts, such as wastewater, in this case, industrial refrigeration, clean water. And we're finding that setting up the cohorts along similar industries, it's much easier to accomplish without tight geographical constraints. And as I said earlier, getting technical experts in was much easier. For instance, in the spring of 2020, we were able to bring in Grant Weaver, a national expert on low-cost nutrient removal strategies, and he was able to present remotely for 2 hours from the East Coast to all these participants, spread out through Montana, Washington, and Oregon. And that just wouldn't have happened. It didn't make sense for him to fly across the country to do that. So that was a real plus. And I think Eric's got some comments too on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Bob was mostly speaking there from the program implementer perspective, but from the program funders perspective, I really can't stress enough the value that BPA sees in being able to more equitably serve its broad service territory, right? Historically, if you were a potential strategic energy management participant in Kalispell, you were probably going to go through a sole delivery, where you weren't working with others who worked in your same industry, and that, something not quite equitable about that. So the ability to pull together participants from across our service territory, I think is something that we're definitely going to invest additional energy in moving forward.
Great, thanks, Eric. So energy scans, I think also known as treasure hunts. I mean, if you've been involved in SCM, that's typically a big part of the process. These site visits typically involve plant staff, working with an SCM coach and engineers and utility personnel all on site to identify and estimate potential O&M savings opportunities. We frankly found this probably to be our biggest challenge on the SCM side. We did try a few different methods with varying success. And first of all, we said, well, let's just kind of do the same thing, but we'll do it in a socially distant large group. Walk through the plant, maybe live cell phones streaming out to the people who couldn't make it in person. And, the issue we found there is, really only one person could hear the cell phone because it's kind of a one-on-one connection and it was noisy. We pivoted a little bit by taking some photos. That helped some, but it just kind of also really slowed things down. So we tried some other things, and what did seem to work is first of all was just having a technical lead present at the energy scan, and then having staff log in from their offices into a remote platform, and that improved the communication extremely. And the second thing was the energy scan training was moved to occur just prior to the energy scan. And we also kind of just focus on specific subsystems to kind of break things down to more, I guess, bite-sized chunks. And, the staff would complete the energy scan later in the day and then report back. And again, we also utilize Mural software. That's this up on the right side of the slide. And that was used to separate opportunities into 4 quadrants for after the scan. And as part of those scans and remote walkthroughs, we had operators share and walk through their SCADA screens online, and those are able to find some great savings, some gems. Again, we focus primarily by subsystem, but in one case, ESI was identifying an opportunity to reduce grit pump runtime. And the change was made immediately to the timer, saving an hour of runtime each day. Live stream walkthroughs with just one person sharing the audio and video via their smartphone worked better. But we really found the best solution that we found was utilizing a wearable camera and microphone, such as RealWear or HoloLens. It's up there on the right slide. That technology, it was also safer to use than people walking around with their smartphones trying to take pictures. And they also have features such as noise cancellation for the microphone. And probably most importantly, they can share the video and audio to a single platform that's accessible by multiple users simultaneously. So everyone can kind of see what the camera is seeing and hearing. And this photo on the right here was actually part of an actual scan using the RealWear head-mounted tablet, and that allowed the technical lead to identify some fan savings, just going real time. One last technology was basically headset walkie-talkies with noise cancellation. We used those in one of our visits, and they proved to be pretty successful. It allowed multiple people to kind of fan out and collect information simultaneously in an engine room. And those are basically our main findings. And I'm going to let Eric summarize the findings and the lessons learned.
Thanks, Bob. So take us back to the beginning of the presentation. It's March 2020, and the next couple months are looking a little murky for energy efficiency in the industrial sector, right? ESI was able to pivot quickly because we already had a shared platform for remote communications, and a lot of our staff were familiar with that. But over the following year and a half, we've really developed our muscles in terms of how we reach the market remotely in a more sophisticated way. And that muscle memory is really going to impact how we deliver the program moving forward more efficiently, right? So remote meetings, to keep more frequent remote meetings, especially for end users who are a little bit further away, to keep the balls rolling, right? Remote logger deployment for M&V activities when it's a more simple project, and we have on-site staff that we can trust to deploy the equipment. Using webinar-based trainings to generate leads instead of in-person trainings, and trying to reach broader audiences with those webinars. Using remote SEM cohorts to pull together end users from wider geographic area, but have them share more in common in terms of what their facility needs are from that strategic energy management engagement. So a lot of learnings there, a lot of things that we will continue to apply to improve the efficiency of our program outreach. All that being said, we've also recognized that the work that we do, some aspects of it really is more productive in person. So especially opportunity identification at new sites or sites that have installed a new system or process at the facility. Relationship building with new staff at sites that we've worked with in the past. The more complex M&V deployments, we've had several projects that we didn't realize there was an issue with the commissioning until we went to get the loggers 3 months later, and if we had our staff on site for the initial deployment, that delay would have been avoided. So there are a lot of these activities where we will continue to depend on our talented boots on the ground to make sure that we get the most bang for our buck. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Eric and Bob. That was wonderful. Really had to change directions quickly there. That seems like you did it pretty effectively as well, being able to re-engage rather quickly then after COVID took hold. So we're in the period now where we're going to have our question and answer period, and Kim's going to bring the panel all together to be on the screen here. And we do have a number of questions from the audience, so we can start with some of those. Let me pull some of them up. So let me start with Clifton. Clifton, can you talk a little bit about how gamification is a little more sophisticated than a suggestion program, and how you might have developed that to be more engaging?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think I saw it in the chat. I do think suggestion system in which employees are encouraged to provide suggestions for improvement to the company. I think the differentiator is that for true crowdsourcing, I think John Cotter would say that you actually want to empower employees for broad. I think the exact term is empower employees for broad-based action. So the differentiator is that a lot of the companies actually pledge to implement the best ideas. It wasn't just a thought exercise. But not only that, I think another facet that was common in the case studies that we looked at was an incentive program, rewarding employees for participating. You can ask them to provide suggestions, but to really encourage people to do it, you want to offer prizes, recognition and communications, that kind of thing. So I think those are the kind of two differentiators for crowdsourcing and gamification.
Did it seem like gamification and crowdsourcing might engage a person to think more broadly than perhaps a simple suggestion program across the organization to think more broadly?
I think so, because I think the part of it is, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, more of a team effort, team thinking.
Right. I think two things. I think one is the competitive element. I think when you're going against your peers and there are rewards and recognition at stake, and it's kind of like in a public setting, there is more incentive to like really think outside the box, and to really put your best foot forward. And then as you said, I think the team-based element for several of the partners, the companies, that helps a lot as well. When you have a team with, and you build some camaraderie, you can collaborate on ideas. I think that does help to improve the quality of the ideas.
Mm-hmm. Great. We had a couple of questions in regard to resiliency. And the question was, how does the growing risk of cyber attacks relate? I think you touched on that a little bit. But also, how about the past year and the unprecedented strain on the U.S. grid between drought, winter storms, heat waves, and impactful hurricane seasons? How does that change the formula? Or, I guess I didn't really understand exactly how the formulas work, but maybe you could talk a little bit, Allison, about how the formula would take that into consideration.
Yeah, that is going to be something that every owner is going to have to think about. So, for example, somebody who is in the Northwest right now is really thinking about the heat wave and how much hotter it is now than it's ever been before, and what that could potentially mean for the grid as well as other parts of their business that may be impacted by the heat. So, thinking about what kind of infrastructure you need to mitigate against those. Do you need different wiring for a microgrid? Do you need different kinds of batteries? Do you need to relocate the batteries to a different location? What that could potentially mean and how that might impact your infrastructure costs. So it might be worth for a lot of folks to add the proverbial fudge factor when you're thinking about the potential risks. So, for example, up here in New England where I am, we don't see a lot of hurricanes. But about 10 years ago, we got Hurricane Irene that came through. And it's still the example a lot of folks up here use when we're talking about long-term outages and devastating storms. So, thinking about what your worst case scenario has been in the past, and then, adding a little bit of percentage onto that as far as its risk to you might be worth it, in the face of climate change, for somebody who might be closer to the coastal areas, might want to think more about, what flooding could potentially mean to them. If you're just outside of a flood zone, maybe you want to think about what that could mean should that flood zone expand in the coming decades. So, thinking about, what you've seen in the past, and then adding a little bit to those risks might be worth it when you're evaluating what the risk to your business could be.
Thank you. It seems like you as a resource to your customers is kind of a unique offering. I don't know of other organizations that have that available. Is this something is there a specific reason this was developed for your organization?
It was because energy resilience is really something that is a lot of folks are starting to think about. It's something that is really on the forefront of a lot of federal agencies that they're thinking about, particularly folks like the Department of Energy, Department of Defense, that are really starting to think about these things. And in a broad sense, when you're thinking about protecting life and property, costs and payback aren't necessarily something that you're going to consider if the alternative is a lot of people die. But when you start to think about what those assets could do for you during the large percentage of time that those assets aren't actually protecting life and property, there's a chance for some of those investments to actually work for you 100% of the time. But the big question is, does it make sense for you to invest in something like that? And we're up here, we're getting a lot of folks that are starting to think about what does it mean to, take control of your own energy needs. So some people are thinking about it from that standpoint rather than a resiliency standpoint. They're coming at it from I want control. I want to be able to be in control of these assets and when I get this energy and how my energy is being produced. And I want control over the assets and the repairs when things go down, because I know in that case, I know exactly when everything is going to be back up and running because I'm the one doing it. So there's a lot of use cases out there, and it's really something that folks are starting to think more about. But it's a very nascent sector where there's not a lot of benchmarking for costs and what makes a reasonable investment.
Sure. How comfortable are you in recommending a combined heat and power system as a step towards resiliency? It seems like it would provide the benefit of perhaps additional energy efficiency if you could use both the heat and the electricity, but yet you're still dependent on some sort of a fuel to run it, which might be more available than electricity, depending on what kind of a situation you're looking at. Is that something that you work with, making comparisons of?
You could definitely use this to compare a combined heat and power with any other type of option that a particular location might have. I think it's definitely going to depend on each individual, and they're going to have to think about, like what you just said, the fuel access. What's the ability for your fuel type to get to you in the event that something catastrophic happens.
Sure. Yeah, well, certainly. Cyber attacks and downturn or, problems with the electric grid and other things have had us all thinking about it. And I've considered whether or not to purchase a generator to have at home. I'm wondering, have you got one?
I do not, but I'm actually doing some work in the residential energy resilience sector right now. So there's some programming, you're particularly up in Vermont with batteries and solar for the residential sector.
Cool.
That one is, a little more, most homeowners, aren't going to have an energy manager in their spare bedroom. So, it's a little bit of a different animal, but it is something that is being thought about and explored right now.
For Eric and Bob, I'd like to ask what their clients are thinking about in regard to resiliency and the ability to maintain their production, their operations through unfortunate events. Is that something that you work with them on?
I'm not sure that's our focus.
Yeah.
We do work with them occasionally on those things, but I guess first of all, the Northwest probably, I would say earthquakes are an issue. We're not going to typically get a hurricane. We do get the occasional extreme windstorm and fires, I suppose.
Yeah.
Do you have any? I would think Eric may have some issues with BPA's transmission lines resilience. That's probably something he's maybe more knowledgeable about, which obviously ultimately affects all the industrial end users.
Have any of the recent spikes in heat and temperature created shortages in electricity for any of your consumers?
In a localized way. I certainly don't work in the transmission group, so I can't speak to it as well as many others could. But we've had some localized events, but have mostly, the hydroelectric system really serves us well in terms of having a reliable source of power. So really, it's just where there are bottlenecks getting that power to specific parts of our service territory.
Sure. Yeah, it seems like that would be a very good situation, and I think that's why.
And just to continue on with Bob's comment, though, we are focused on energy efficiency, and I think that Alice in her presentation really focused on energy efficiency as a first step.
Yeah.
The kWh that you don't use is a kWh that you don't have to generate in an emergency situation. So that at this point is really BPA's role in supporting resiliency in the industrial sector.
Mhm. I agree with that. Energy as a first step is the important thing in a number of things. I know some corporations that are working on becoming 100% renewable energy, and still energy efficiency is the first step toward that, because why would you obtain renewable energy and work towards that to then waste it or not use it as effectively as you possibly could? It's great. Clifton, when you did the study with the 4 companies, did you get a chance to meet with the practitioners that were working on that with themselves? And did they give you a sense as to how hard it was to get that started?
Yeah, that's a good question. We didn't directly for this paper, but we had previously worked on the case studies that had been published through the Better Plans program. We had interacted with all the applicants. I think it does depend. I think Saint-Gobain, actually, I just to one example, is a pretty creative company in general. They have a lot of different interesting, innovative, outside the box energy efficiency programs. Like they have a energy champion program where they actually have like wrestler style championship belts for the best energy champions at their facilities. And so they have a pretty good track record of like fun, interesting initiatives. But just going back to applying Cotter's model, I think the important thing is to actually just be diligent about all the steps. And these things didn't come out overnight. All the companies were very meticulous about planning out and communicating their vision. I think that's the one common denominator.
Mm-hmm. Good. And there's one other question here about gamification on getting academic or national lab research more practically or industrially focused. I'm not quite sure. Have you seen gamification with getting academic or national lab research more practically industrially focused?
It's a tough question. I saw it in the chat. We had pointed to some examples, these various government prizes, various prizes for to encourage research in specific avenues. And so I think that almost might be a separate category for research. I think prizes are a type of competition, but not necessarily what we're talking about specifically. But I mean, for example, I know that Better Plants and DOE had an I-Team prize last year, which was for individuals with achieving an energy efficiency. It was a cash prize for like energy employees, energy managers. I think it's complicated. I think I imagine going forward that will be the direction. I think gamification, crowdsourcing are becoming more and more popular. I imagine that it will absolutely become more practically and industrial focused.
Yeah, I can see that too.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, we're nearly done with our question and answer time. I'm wondering if any of the panelists have one last thing they'd like to say before we are logged out here. And if not, I want to thank you for being part of this. Thank you for being very well prepared and sharing your knowledge with all of us that were here listening. We will have a debrief in about half an hour. So I hope that you will be able to log into that and participate in the networking and the debrief exercise. So thank you all.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone.